Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. This week we're going to fit some more of the accessories to the wrecker. First up we have an aluminium roof bar kit. If you search EMCT1271 you should be able to find a set fairly easily. If not, have a look for Volvo FH16 light bar and they'll come up. Same goes for the second part of the video. You might want to add Tamiya too, or you'll probably get some for the full-size trucks. In the bag you get a nice set of aluminium parts, screws and a couple of wide LEDs. One of the lenses had popped out of one of the pods during shipping, but it just presses back in without any bother. As well as the 4 spotlights, there's also another 3 small rectangular LEDs in the crossbar, all rather nice. The LEDs are wired in parallel, which technically will work with the MFC or similar, but it's not ideal. And besides, the spots will be connected up to some custom electronics, and the 3 small LEDs will be connected to the speed light outputs on the MFC, so they're going to need to be wired up individually. The fixings are the usual tiny Chinese metric Phillips head screws. They're going to be really easy to strip, but in theory we should only need to fit them once, so I'm sure they'll be just about good enough. There is however a few different lengths and no instructions on which goes where. So to help work it out we'll separate them so we can see how many of each we have. After a bit of experimenting it's not too difficult to work out where they should go. I did find when test fitting them, one of the counter bores for the screw heads wasn't properly formed, so it wouldn't sit inside the hole. Using hand tools, we can spin a drill bit a few times to clean it out. A bit annoying, but nothing major. We can get 2 of the long screws out of the way right away by attaching the end parts to the crossbar. We'll only lightly nip them up for now, as the angle of the crossbar will most likely need a bit of tweaking to get the lights to sit nice and straight. So we can fit the light bar, we're going to be needing the roof off the cab. There's 4 really long screws that go up through some spacers, 2 short screws right at the front, and don't forget there's a small screw on the air intake that goes into the roof. So if you're wondering why it won't come off, you've probably forgotten it, like I did. As usual, before we start adding all the wiring, we need to do a quick test fit. The side bits have threaded holes that should line up with the holes in the roof. I found they were pretty close, but not perfect. As the screws go in, you have to lean on the mounts a little bit to get the screws started. Not a deal breaker, but could be better. Apparently, I also did a test fit of one of the pods too, but we'll look at those in more detail in a minute. To replace the parallel LEDs for the spotlights, I've made a new loom up that's wired as a common anode array. Essentially, all the anodes are connected together and the cathodes are wired out individually, so we'll be able to light them up one at a time once we get the electronics put together. To mount the pods, we need to fit the small stamped mounts to the crossbar using some of the short screws and a little bit of thread lock. Knit the screws up and try and get the mounts as straight as you can. You'll be able to manhandle the pods a little bit to get them spot on when we fit them. Next we pop an LED into a pod and offer it up to the mounts. Then to fit we use 2 more of the short screws and another touch of thread lock. Now it's worth noting, with it all being metal you do need to make sure the LED legs are clear of the mounts. If the LEDs get twisted enough they can quite easily short if the insulation isn't right up to the base of the LED. With all 4 installed we have something like this. There's still the 3 small LEDs to add, but at the time of filming I was still looking for the right size to make up my own loom. They literally just sit in place with a bit of friction to keep them in, so it's really no bother. They'll just be wired as single LEDs and connected to the 3 speedlight connections on the MFC. All that's left to do is feed the wires down into the cab, put the roof on and refit all the screws. And I think while the Tamiya chrome plastic parts are of course very nice, the metal does look a bit better. It's got a nice solid feel too that you just don't get with plastic. Next we have a quick one. We're going to swap the Tamiya grills for these ones. They're polished rather than a satin finish, and there's 2 orange LEDs in the top grill. So for the top grill on the cab we need to remove the 4 tiny screws in the corners and remove the 2 screws in the plastic insert. Then it's just a case of reversing the process with the new grill. For now we'll just fold up the wires and tuck them away behind the grill. Later on we'll drill a couple of holes in the cab for the wires to go through. With the 4 tiny screws back in and the plastic bit and the 2 screws refitted, that's the top grille swapped. Now I've also fitted the cab to the chassis, which was probably a bit premature, but I'm sure we can make it work. Replacing the lower grille is similar. We need to remove the 2 plastic bits at the top and the small screws around the edge. Then we remove the grille so we can replace it with a nice shiny one. But we've got some more lights to fit first. We've got a kit with a bar and 2 large spotlights. Again, all metal and fairly good quality. The bar has 2 yellow LEDs and 3 white that are wired on a little PCB. Just like the roof lights, they're wired in parallel, so I will be modifying them so they're all wired as a common anode array. Just like the top bar, there's no instructions and there's a couple of different sizes of screw. So just like before, we'll separate them out so we can work out where they go. As far as I can tell, the short screws are for mounting the spots to the bar and the longer screws are for mounting the bar to the grille. We can roughly position the bar on the front of the grille and see where the mounting holes come. Turns out the screws are bigger than the holes in the grille, which is a bit of a pain. So we'll fit the grille to the bumper so we can make sure it's perfectly positioned. We'll need to open up 2 of the holes to clear the screws, so we need to be 100% sure. I'm going to position it so the wires go through a hole that we're going to make in the lower plastic insert so the metal can't rub through the insulation. And we'll set the crossbar so it's close to in between the 2 plastic bits. Off camera I've modified the PCB on the crossbar so we've got a common anode array. It was just a case of cutting a couple of tracks and soldering on some more wires. It's made it non-MFC friendly of course, but it's not going to be connected to an MFC, so that's okay. To mount the lights we need to line up the bar and mark exactly where the holes need to be opened up for the screws to fit. A couple of dabs with a fine tip marker does the job quite nicely. Now don't be tempted to use a drill bit. The flutes will catch in the holes and twist up the grille, making a right old mess. Instead we're going to use some small diamond bits in a Dremel to grind the metal rather than try and cut it. When done we have some nice sort of round holes for the screws. Now it's just a case of threading in the 2 screws and nipping them up. Job done. Next we need to make some holes in the upper plastic insert and the bumper for the wires. There's 2 screws that attach the insert that we need to remove so we can mark up where the wires come. We can hold the insert up behind the grille and add a couple of spots with a marker where the wires come. Now with the Dremel we can cut a couple of slots right deep inside the insert where the wires pass through. Next we refit the plastic insert to the bumper with its 2 screws so we can mark up where the holes need to go. This time it's not super critical, so we can just use a small drill bit somewhere near the middle of the slots to mark the plastic. Remove the insert again, drill the marks all the way through with a small drill bit, then swap to a bigger bit so we can make the holes big enough that we can comfortably pass the wires through. Clean up the edges and we can put it all together. We need to feed the wires through the slots and the holes, making sure they don't get caught up on the way. Offer the grille up to the front and install the tiny screws. Reattach the small plastic bits that go on the top of the grille, reattach the number plate holder, carefully stuff the wires up inside the cab and refit the bumper to the chassis with its 2 screws. And there we go, 1 lower light bar fitted. We haven't looked too closely at the wiring as most of it's going to be connected to a custom electronic setup. We'll go through some of that in a future video. Next we'll be adding some of the electronics to get the truck with its MFC running with a pistol grip radio and a wireless control panel. We're going to try and keep it light though and not go too crazy with the details and deep technicalities. Anyway, that's it for this week, so as always thanks for watching, like if you liked, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment if there's something on your mind. Bye guys!